You are listening to ESL Talk, a podcast made for English teachers by English teachers. Here are your hosts, Daniel and Golnaz.
Hello everyone, this is Daniel.
And this is Golnaz. Welcome to second episode of ESL Talk.
Today we're going to talk about flipped learning, why it can be useful, and how we can use it both in the classroom and online.
We also have our first guest, Faye, from Learning with Faye. She's going to tell us about her story and share with us her experience and some useful tips about using flipped learning. Well, many of you are sure familiar with flipped learning and already use it, but for those who might be new to this topic, let us first answer this question. What is flipped learning and how does it work?
So flipped learning essentially is changing or flipping the dynamic of the classroom. So when we see this word flipped, it means we're just rotating or changing something. So in a basic sense, flipped learning is giving the teaching or the responsibility from the teacher to the student. So we're just flipping it around. So there are some differences between traditional and flipped learning styles. And also there's lots of different ways to do this, depending on if you're teaching in the classroom or online. So let's compare some of the differences between traditional and flipped learning styles. So first of all, with the traditional style, the homework is retrospective. You will learn the language in class. You might do a quick practice and then use it and produce it. And it's more practical at home, which means you need feedback later on. Now, this word feedback is really key to flipped learning, and we'll be talking about the ideas and the importance of feedback a little bit later on. But when we have a flipped approach, the homework is based on what's perspective. So it's a little bit of pre-learning, learning the language before class, preparing questions, getting some clarification in the class, using the language in more ways, developing, and then getting better feedback. Better feedback leads to better learning, better relearning, and then we strengthen and we really solidify our knowledge.
Exactly. So how can we apply it in the classroom? As you know, we can use this in many different ways, and it depends on the target language or the skill lesson that you want to cover in the classroom. And it depends on your main aim, your sub-aim, and the class profile and everything. But depending on all of these conditions and considering all of these into account, you can start by assigning a reading or listening activity, or ask your students to watch a video or listen to a podcast prior to the class. So when you do this, you are starting to set the context. And what the learners learn at this stage is going to be used later in class.
Exactly. You can think about it like you're cooking or preparing a meal. Sometimes you need to turn on the oven first, you need to heat it up, or you have to get other things ready before you start cooking. Otherwise, it's going to take a longer time to prepare. It might not be as successful. So definitely preparation is really key. Another way that we can apply this in a face-to-face or classroom environment is doing the activities and receiving feedback, not instantly, but more quickly. So some teachers will wait until the end of the class or a few days after the class to give feedback. If you can give instant feedback, students can respond to it more quickly. They can start to adapt and they can start to think more clearly about an idea, or they have some clarity if they're not sure about something. So live or instant feedback, instant corrections can be a really good way to help students to improve their language skills and also to give them more responsibility and to help them recognize and see their not necessarily errors, but to see where they can improve. So definitely that's another strategy that I would recommend, giving feedback throughout the class continuously.
Exactly. And something that you might want to consider using would be, there are different platforms that you can use to to do everything more smoothly. But like two things that you can use are Edmodo and Moodle. If you use Edmodo, suppose that you give your learners a reading activity or a listening activity, you can put the questions that you want them to answer into Edmodo. You can actually create a kind of an interactive homework for them to do and complete before the class. And instantly, you can give them feedback. The correct answers will be sent to them instantly after they finish the homework. And also you will have a chance to review each student's answers separately and provide them with more personal feedback. Also, you can use Moodle if you want to have some pre-session discussions or conversations, so that you can, prior to the class, you can create an atmosphere for your students where they can virtually interact with each other, answer the questions, have some discussion, and prepare for the whole thing that is going to come next.
Absolutely. Yeah, Moodle can be a really useful tool, and most institutions will use this or something similar. So that's something to consider. Another one you can do individually. Maybe you're just, teaching a few students by yourself. Another great tool is also Quizlet, which can be really useful for vocabulary, for phrases. So maybe lower level learners could really benefit from Quizlet as well. So that's another tool that you might want to think about for, providing these flipped learning techniques and helping students to interact more and be more prepared.
Very nice, exactly. And just in case, something that I want to add here is that after this pre-stage that the students complete before the class, be prepared to give your students enough CCQs, concept check questions. Have them ready prior to the class. Have them ready for your classroom experience, or maybe a mini task to check your learners' understanding, and use it to address their questions or their problems. You might find out that through this process, you might find out that some learners are struggling with some parts of the lesson, or understanding the text, or understanding the language. So you can use this to address their problems. But do not repeat the whole presentation stage, or the whole, do not start giving them a lecture or repeating the whole stage that you have passed already. Just use this to, without asking your students this question: did you understand? Did you learn? Are there any questions? Without asking them these questions, be ready to expose them to a task or to some questions that will help you understand if they have learned or they need more help.
I couldn't agree more with this. As teachers, we sometimes tend to ask questions that are a little bit redundant, such as, do you understand? And usually when we ask this question, do you understand? Students will just nod their head and yes, they'll show you that they understand. But then when it comes to doing a task or showing or demonstrating the learning, that's not always the case. So, as teachers, we have to ask good questions. If we ask specific questions, then we can get a specific answer. And the way that I always try to, use a metaphor or an analogy is in a way of, if we go shopping, we need a shopping list. If I go to the supermarket and I don't have a shopping list, it's going to take me a long time to find what I need and find, the items that I need. Just like in a classroom, if I have really well prepared specific questions for that lesson that I can ask my students, they'll give me the information they need, and they'll get the learning back and the teaching that they need as well to help them to develop. So definitely effective questioning is a really powerful tool to help you as a teacher and to help your learners, especially with English learning.
And let's say that up to here, you have done the pre-staging, and now in the classroom, you have asked your students the proper questions, and you have made sure that everyone is on the right track. Now it is time to set the main task. I personally would prefer to set a speaking task here, but it can change. I mean, depending on what you are doing and what your main aim is, you can actually change it. You can, for example, add writing and give them a writing task to do in the classroom, or even later for the next session. But preferably speaking would be better, because we want to see our learners produce and use whatever we have covered actively in the classroom, so that we can give them also proper feedback on their performance. So you give them the task, set the task well with clear instructions, and then the students do the task in pairs or in groups in the classroom. Let's suppose that, for example, you have covered you have given your students a video about first conditional, and then you have done all the stages, you have followed the whole process, and everything has been checked, understanding is okay. Now you give them a task to make your students able to use first conditional in the classroom actively. And then that's the time, that's the place that your students will use the input that they have received at the first stage actively, and they will participate in discussion, maybe negotiation, sharing opinions. This is where critical thinking can happen and learning by using can happen. And you, as a teacher, can monitor and prepare for next stage.
Exactly. And not only that, during this activity, you can also give feedback, just small, subtle pointers or indicators. It's really important that in a group setting with a few different students, that they do the learning. You're the facilitator, you're the helper, and the students are the ones that are, actively making sure that this activity is being done. It's not you just lecturing or telling. It's you setting up, giving the tools, giving the instructions, building the foundations, and then handing it over to students to then continue, develop, grow, and build. So absolutely, it's a fantastic method and a fantastic strategy by just slowly going step by step, giving the autonomy and the responsibility to the learner, to the student. And that's also going to help them not only build their confidence, but also improve their motivation as well, which kind of takes us on to the next strategy, the next thing that we can do to apply this flipped learning concept in the classroom, which is paired work and group work. Now, this can be very tricky at times, and I'm sure, as we both know, Golnaz, sometimes we've had to do group work and it's been quite difficult because we have to ensure that the dynamics of the group work well. So as a teacher, if you have multiple students or a few students, it's really important to try to think about abilities, backgrounds, skills. Now, of course, you can definitely pair up a stronger and a weaker student or two similar level students, but you have to try to consider that when you're making groups. Sometimes you can just make a group at random and it works great. Other times you can make a group at random and it doesn't work so great. So know your learners, know their skills and abilities. And if they're doing these pre-learning tasks, if they're doing, these activities before class, if you're giving feedback regularly and you're asking the right questions, you should be able very quickly to establish who are the stronger students and which students still need some more help. So definitely paired work and group work can be really useful. For obviously English speaking or English writing, a really nice, easy task to do is to set up a role play or to give students choices, different options. Students love choices, they love options. So instead of saying, this is the role play, we're going to do this one. No, here are 4 or 5 different role plays. Which one would you like to choose? You're automatically empowering the student. You're flipping the power and the choice to them. So then they can say, I'd really like this, or I'm interested in this, or I have a connection with this. So already you're removing that barrier. So definitely giving them choice is great, and also giving them an opportunity where you're a little bit more hands-off. They can relax a little. They can have fun with the language. They can have fun with some of the words and the situations. They can rotate roles and positions in there. Conversation and context are so crucial to learning a language and being effective in a language. If I know the situation and I know the right time and the right place to use a phrase or to use some words, then that's going to definitely strengthen English skill and English ability. So paired work, group work is really important. And this is something we're probably going to pick up in a future episode. But that's just a quick example for you guys to hopefully use in your classroom.
Thank you, Daniel, for your explanations about flipped learning. Hopefully, we have covered enough tips, suggestions on this topic for all our teachers outside to use them in their classroom. Now, next with us is Faye, our special guest today. We are going to have an interview with her to learn a little bit more about her and her experiences, and also her experience with flipped learning. Stay tuned.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next portion of today's episode. Very happy to welcome our guest, Faye, who's joining us today. Hello, Faye. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So Faye's going to talk to us a little bit about herself, about her teaching project, and also go into some more detail about flipped learning, which is what today's episode is all about. So first of all, Faye, could you start off just by introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, so I've been living in Canada now for the last 11 years, but I'm originally from Brazil, which is actually where I started teaching ESL kind of by accident in a way. So I've been teaching for 14 years, and my experience is in a variety of different kinds of classes, but mostly business English and exam prep for Cambridge exams and EAP. Yep.
Beautiful. Faye, during our previous episode, we shared our stories with our listeners and about our journey, how we decided to become an English teacher. You mentioned that it happened for you by accident. Would you want to tell us about a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. I was actually going to college for design in Brazil, and I started teaching part-time actually just to make some money on the side. I had lived abroad, and I actually learned English as a second language first. Actually, I was actually alphabetized in English before in Portuguese. I went to an English immersion school in Brazil. So to me, it was kind of natural. And I'm like, oh, this is something I can do. You don't need certification in Brazil. So I started teaching, and I fell in love with it and finished my degree. Which was good because that gave me the chance to do the master's later in TESOL and linguistics. But I actually never worked with design. I've just always been a teacher ever since then. Yeah.
Wow. It's really interesting to get all of these different perspectives from different countries, backgrounds, and, different groundings, I would say, in learning and in teaching. So Faye's actually now running English Learning ESL channel called Learning with Faye. So could you tell me a little bit about your motivation for this and kind of your goals and your aspirations for this project?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always really liked using technology to engage with my students outside the classroom. And I kind of felt like after they left Canada or left my classroom, they would contact me on social media, but we wouldn't really interact anymore. And with the whole pandemic, and actually I've just become a mother, I just decided, well, maybe this is a good time for me to put all of those ideas into action and create my Instagram and my YouTube channel. And I always just wanted to use my classroom background as well, like all those challenges I know students had, all of those challenges that I could see students having with pronunciation, with grammar, and strategies for exams. And I'm like, well, I could just use that. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It seems like we've done a lot of the groundwork as teachers anyway. So having all that available is just a really nice, easy way to help learners even more. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we're going to go in and talk a little bit more about flipped learning now. Obviously, like you said, moving online, there's definitely more of this taking place. So let's hopefully hear your experiences and kind of what you bring to the table in terms of flipped learning. So how do you use flipped learning in the classroom and then online? So what are your experiences with flipped learning, Faye?
Yeah, I never realized I was doing it actively until I learned about flipped learning. But I've always found that with classes, especially more advanced classes and exam prep and EAP, where students are highly motivated and have a little bit more independence, I find that it's often better for them to give them the opportunity to do a lot of the learning on their own first and kind of peer teach in class. I've always liked the role of the teacher as a facilitator. That's another thing I've always recommended when I train new teachers, because I've also done a lot of teacher training, is you can't think of yourself as the lecturer, the source of all knowledge. We're just there to facilitate communication mostly. And I find that flipped learning really helped with that. It really builds students' confidence, because then when they come into the classroom, they've already got more background on the topic, and they've done some of the studying on their own, and they feel more at ease and they can contribute more.
Absolutely. And with flipped learning, if, for new teachers or new ESL teachers or people who are maybe new to teaching English or, practicing teaching English, how would you recommend they get started with flipped learning? How can they get to grips with it and get to understand it a little bit more?
I would tell them to, first of all, try not to do it all yourself. I know that it's tempting to create an amazing video lesson and just have all of this lesson plan and all these questions, but there's so much ready for you online now. And I would say to thinking of a topic, like we usually have weekly topics in the classroom, right? So what is our weekly topic? Find a TED Talk. Even for lower levels, you can find something on TED Ed. And just those basic comprehension questions you can get students to do at home and do some vocabulary research on their own, like find 5 words you didn't know before and bring them to class the next day and bring these questions, think about these questions. And then the next day you take it all up. And in that way, it's not as daunting, right? It's kind of like something you would do maybe like if you tell a friend to watch a video and then the next day you'll sit down and talk together about it. Kind of see it that way.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. It was really interesting what you mentioned about not going with it like all by yourself and try to use some authentic materials. I really agree with you on that. And that's really very valuable advice. Thank you for that, Faye. So once again, if our listeners want to follow you on Instagram, because, here our aim is to connect with teachers and with people all around the world. So I think our listeners would be so happy to know about your Instagram page or maybe Facebook. How can they follow you? How can they get connected with you?
Sure. On Instagram, you can just find me as Learning with Faye. And Faye is F-E-Y. And just write it all together and you'll find me there. My YouTube channel is up, but I'm still working on the videos right now. But hopefully in the next month, they'll be uploaded there and we'll get started. So same thing, Learning with Faye, Faye, F-E-Y. And connect with me there. Send me messages and suggestions of content. I'm always happy to go with what the students need. And I'd love to get to know your audience more too. Yeah.
So one last question before we say goodbye for today, Faye. If someone is thinking of becoming an English teacher or they're thinking about teaching online, teaching English or even another language, what's the best piece of advice you could give them? Or what are some things maybe they should be aware of before they start this journey?
That's a very good question. One thing I find trainees always struggled with is thinking of themselves as the boss, as the teacher. Like lack of confidence is a huge thing for teachers who are starting out, and the whole imposter syndrome. I know I've suffered from it in the past, and I still do if it's a very, very new territory. So try to just remind yourself that when you are the teacher, nobody doubts that you're the teacher. None of your students will come into the classroom or to your lesson online trying to assess you, or is this person really the teacher? They already know you are. So remind yourself of that. Just tell yourself, I am the teacher, I am the boss, and that will give you the confidence boost needed. And I find that is basically everything to start, and it will make it all way more pleasurable for you.
Thank you, Faye, for joining us today. It was really great to hear about your experiences and your journey and how you use flipped learning in the classroom as well. Obviously, feel free to follow Faye on Instagram, Learning with Faye, and we'll also be sure to post a link as well so that our followers and our listeners can follow you and learn with you as well, hopefully. Thank you so much, Faye.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we are going to wrap it up for today. So if you do have any questions, feel free to write into us and to let us know those questions. We'd love to discuss them in future episodes. So you can email your questions to esltalkpodcast@gmail.com. And maybe if you've used flipped learning before, you can share your experience or maybe some questions you have about flipped learning.
Also, remember to follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook at ESL Talk Podcast.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes and to follow us on Instagram and Facebook for even more ESL teaching content.